if you guys look at this graph, and here's the graph of my lovely little roller coaster, okay? Now, we obviously have a start and the end, okay? And when we're looking into this roller coaster, what I want you guys to look at is just in some certain intervals. I'm not going to worry about the first and the end. That's kind of a different value, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I just want you guys to look at these kind of values here. Actually, well, we can talk about this. This is on a closed interval. Let's say this is on the time interval of 0 to 30 seconds, right? And this represents your height. This represents time. Okay? Now, as you're on this roller coaster, you go through varying heights. So we can say here is a maximum point that you hit. Then, actually, let's look at this. Within a given time interval, right? So let's just say this is going to be, let's say this is at 15 seconds. So we'll call this at 10 seconds, and we'll call this at 25. All right. At 10 seconds, plus or minus 5 seconds, is that the maximum height? Would you guys agree? Plus or minus a couple seconds from 10, that's the maximum height. Yes? You go a little bit past 10 seconds and you start going down. A little bit before 10 seconds and you're still creeping up. Agreed? Yes? If you look at 15, plus or minus a second, that's the minimum value. At 14 seconds, you're here. At 16 seconds, you're going back up. So at 15 seconds, you're at a minimum value. Does everybody agree? And then back over here, at 25 seconds, between a given kind of interval of time, for instance, let's just say between 4 seconds, you can say that that is your maximum. So we're going to label these minimum and max. Okay? Now, we are on a closed interval because we start at 0 and we end at we end at 30. Very closed. It's defined, right? You're going to start at this time, you end at that time. Now, what I want you guys to look at, Sarah, the important thing is, if I was going to ask you on your roller coaster ride, you get off the roller coaster ride and you're saying like, hey, how fun was that? Oh wow, I have such an adrenaline rush. Well, how high did you go? Right? What was the maximum point? And again, let's just say 50 feet, 40 feet, 20 feet. So if I was going to ask you, and let's just say this is 10 feet, you start 10 feet. You start at 0 feet. So if I was going to ask you, well, how high did you get? You can say that the absolute highest that you got is not over here, but it's that first maximum, right? Does that make sense? Right? That's the highest you went on the roller coaster. That is what we call our absolute maximum, because that's the highest that you possibly went on the roller coaster. However, this is not something we need to forget about. Plus or minus a couple seconds, is that still what we call a maximum value? Right? It's still a maximum value within this open interval. So what we call this is like an open interval of time, which would be like an open interval from 24 to 26. But notice how it's open, not closed. So when you have an open interval, we call this a relative, or you could call it a local max. And I'll use both uses of language. So it's still a maximum point. It's still a maximum height within a given time interval, but it's not the highest that you went on the roller coaster. The highest you went on the roller coaster is the absolute max, right? And therefore, when we look at the minimum, well, the minimum, guys, on this closed interval is where you started and when you stopped, correct? So we'll call those the absolute min over here. So this minimum is still a minimum value, right? It's still between, on a given time interval, between, like I said, 14 and 16, that's a minimum value. So, but it's not the absolute, so it's relative or local. Okay? And what a lot of times they'll say is, the absolute max. And we'll say h is equal to 50. And absolute min on this closed interval, h would equal 0. Okay? Now, it is important to understand